Hey everybody, this is Beth Wilson, the Pulaski County Horticulture Agent. Today we're going to talk about planting holes and trees, how those planting holes can affect the health and subsequent growth of the tree. This is part of Tree Week, and I think it's very important that this issue is addressed because a lot of people make mistakes right from the very beginning in their planting hole. So I am going to use Dr. Bill Fountain's slide set here. He's got a good one that's already put together, so I didn't want to duplicate. But let's get started here. So when we're planting a tree, we do want to think about the site. And we want to match the tree that we choose to the site. We also have concerns about the quality of nursery stock that you might have. Just depends on where you purchase your planting stock from, is in the condition that it's in, but it's something you certainly want to take a look at and not just assume that everything that you buy is going to be quality nursery stock. And then, of course, we will get to the planting hole. So yeah, this is Dr. Fountain. So he's saying this is from the perspective of somebody who deals with trees all the time, and we're doing diagnostic work on it. A lot of times we are tree corners, which I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yes. And then the tree mortician, yeah, I think that's kind of funny. So the quality of our nursery stock is first and foremost. Before you ever think about even a site, we need to take a look at that nursery stock. And, you know, we always want to have quality nursery stock. What does that mean? Well, it certainly means not having the bottom right type of balled and burlapped or bare root nursery stock going into your planting hole. This is never going to do very well. Circling roots are never going to uncircle. They're just going to get bigger and eventually girdle the tree. So yeah, we want to make sure that we're putting the right tree in the right place. And we want to have a lot of different species, not just a row of maples or a row of X. You want to try to diversify your species. But you certainly do want to make sure that you are looking at the nursery stock, not just plopping it out. If it's a container, for example, you're not just popping it out of the container and just setting it right in the hole. You want to take a look at what's inside there. All right, so when we select our stock to our trees, this is Dr. Fountain, and I understand he would consider this tree that's been pruned on the right, he would consider that plant a weed because it's had to be pruned like the Dickens for the power lines. So we want to make sure that we've got the right size of plant that's going to tree for that area. I always tell kids when you're starting to plant a tree, you don't just look down, you actually look up and you will see what the surroundings are. You have to think 30, 40 years ahead, and that is very hard to do sometimes. All right, so let's talk about the planting hole. And again, we can talk about the quality of the stock. This tree on the right has a lot of issues. The way it's staked is just kind of weird. Some of these branches are going to have to be pruned in order to get you a central leader, which is what most of our trees we want to prune to. So there's a lot of things that have to be done for that tree to be successful in 20 or 30 years. We'll also talk about the planting hole, and that's coming up. So we're going to talk about the depth and the size and anything that might be going in the hole that's not natural. Okay, so for example, we see this a lot. Parking lot trees, bless their hearts, they have a very tough road ahead, regardless of the species. But here in this picture, as you can see, we've got a red maple. And red maples are native to Kentucky, but they are a floodplain species. I see them when I kayak around ponds and lakes and things like that. And this plant has been put in a parking island where it's going to be hot, it's going to be dry, it has no soil, and of course, whatever soil is there is going to be extremely compacted. And so, yes, the question that we get is, this is not doing well, so what fertilizer do I put on? Like, that's going to solve the problem. The problem was they picked the wrong species for this site. And again, looking at that picture a little more close up, we don't have a central leader, and as the bullet says, we have codominant leaders, which on maples is not uncommon since they are oppositely branched. But we do want to make sure that we're setting that plant up to be successful, having one central leader. The circling roots are a real problem. Like I said, they'll never uncircle, and they'll only get bigger and eventually girdle. And then the size of that root ball is small. It's so small, the picture before, that's very small root ball. It's going to take a while for that plant to get established. All right. It's a very good idea. And especially just yards, anywhere you're going to plant a tree, it's really a good idea to do a percolation test. And basically, it's really not that hard to do. If you want to use your planting hole as your perk test, you can. So go ahead and dig the hole where you think you want to plant your tree. You fill that with water, and you just time it to see how long it takes for the water to drain out. So we want to make sure that within 24 hours that an 18-inch depth hole the water is gone. That's really the main thing. You can measure it with a yardstick or something, or if you want to. But the main thing is start with kind of saturated soil, and then fill your hole up 18 inches deep, and make sure that in 24 hours has drained completely out. If it does not drain completely out, either change your site, dig another hole in a different spot, or if it doesn't drain out, well, then that might be a good spot for a red maple, which likes floodplain, likes wet soils, or bald cypress, something like that. And some of the good tree guys and soil guys, they'll even smell the soil, because the color and the smell can tell you something about the soil before you even do your perk test. But anyway, gray soil usually has no oxygen, so that means it stays wet. It doesn't drain very well. If it smells bad, you've got some anaerobic thing going on, which is probably not the best for tree roots. So just understand that. All right, let's get to the planting hole. In good sites with good, well-drained soil, not very compacted soil, we really want 2 to 3 times the diameter of the root ball that you're planting. However, you can go wider if you want. Roots are kind of lazy, and they will go where it's easiest. And so if you dig a very small hole and pile up a bunch of mulch, where are they going to grow? They're going to grow up into the mulch, because that's where it's easiest. So you want to make sure your hole is wide. You've got a lot of good backfill soil that's uncompacted back in there. And that way the roots are going to grow right out immediately. This picture, Dr. Fountain likes to use this to address some issues. And basically, the grass isn't growing very well. That tells you something. They're planting a ball and burlap. They are getting the burlap off, so that's good. But look at the size of their hole. And the woman there has some sort of implement that is required to break up really hard soil. So the harder the soil, the bigger the diameter of the hole should be. As big as you can get it, because like I said, in well-drained soils, we're talking about 2 to 3 times the size of the root ball. But in more difficult soils, it's going to be, you want the hole to be even wider. But at least they are removing the burlap. But that poor tree has a lot of water needs right off the bat because it's leafed out. It's got very compacted soils, and we'll just have to see. I don't know where this is, but it'd be interesting to see if this tree is still alive. I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but when you have these circling roots or containers that where all the roots are at the bottom of the container circling, you really want to do some pruning of that root ball to try to extend those and flare out those roots before it goes in the planting hole, or else chuck this one and get one that's not got circling roots. That would be the best thing to do. All right, so the shape of our hole. You really just want it to be wide. You want, when you set the tree down in the hole, you want to have a solid base that's not going to settle, because when we plant trees more deeply than they should, that's going to cause issues again in 8, 15, 20 years. Right when you get used to that nice big tree, it's going to be gone. But we can go right down the line here. Number 2 is talking about the soil surface. Number 3 there is talking about the unamended backfill soil. Do not put good bagged soil back in the hole. You want what came out of the hole to go right back in. Number 4 there talks about the depth. We'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later, but basically you want to find that the trunk flare or the first major root and not plant that any deeper than 1 or 2 inches below the soil. Number 5, there's talking about the root flare that has to be above the soil surface. Never plant that or put soil over top of that. Number 6 is talking about the amount of mulch. Mulching is extremely important for a tree because when grass is competing with tree roots, there's research that shows that the tree roots aren't as robust and hasn't grown as much as they could have without the competition from the grass roots. So we want 2 to 3 inches of mulch, no more than that. We do not want mulch right up against the base of the trunk. We want it in a donut shape around the tree, none touching that root flare or the trunk. Number 7 is talking about a wire basket. If you do have a ball and burlap tree, you want to make sure that you're removing at least the top half of the wire basket completely. You also want to remove any of the synthetic burlap that may be around it. I would even remove the natural burlap. Just make sure you're getting, because the roots are not going to grow down, they're going to grow out. And so you need them to be unencumbered by that basket. Number 8 is just talking about firm the ground at the base of the planting hole. Make sure it's not going to settle or the tree's not going to wallow. Of course, that we'll talk about staking in a little bit. And then hopefully you'll get number 9, which is the new root growth into that planting hole. So if I go to a client's house and they've called and said that their tree is not doing well, maybe it's got some branch dieback, and if I go there and I look at the tree and I don't see a root flare, especially on one this size of this picture here, for example, and it looks more like a telephone pole going into the ground, that tells me that initially it was planted too deeply and that now you've got some issues. The roots are going to die, and then the top part of the plant's going to die. So when we plant that tree, we want to examine the root ball, find that first major root that's coming off the trunk, and only plant that 1 or 2 inches below the soil surface. That's it. And also in the nursery, sometimes they can get it a little deep. The picture on the right-hand side shows this. This is where if you can see my cursor, this is where the soil was piled up to in the container. But the first order root was way down here. So we used to say plant it back at the same depth it was in the container or in the ball and burlap. Anymore, we do not say that. We say to find that first order root and make sure that's not planted too deeply. All right. The saying in the nursery trade or arborist trade, whatever, is that you plant them high, you watch them die. That's because usually the roots will just tend to dry out faster. And so try not to plant them too high. Sometimes it'll work, but you're better off to plant them at the right depth from the get-go. Okay. This planting hole is all those things that's bulleted over there. It's too high. The tree was set to or planted too high, and the hole was too small. And as you can see, the basket, the wire basket was not removed, so that's going to cause some girdling issues down the road. These roots are all over the place. If they mulched it, they're growing into the mulch. They're growing out, not down. And of course, the person that's planting this tree thinks they're doing the right thing, but they're not. They're doing a disservice to that poor tree. Okay. So what if the soil drains and the hole's been dug properly? Let's make sure that we're getting off, like I said, we're getting off anything that's synthetic. Burlap can now be synthetic. It's not always natural material. So if you burn it and it actually, or you put a flame to it and it does burn, that's natural. But if it melts, it's synthetic. So you need to be sure of that. Take all the twine off. The twine is synthetic. And like I said, we're going to take those baskets off, at least the top half. And yeah, use your wire cutters, get it off. In some cases, if the ball is holding together, you can take the entire basket off, and that is fine. But at the very least, you're going to remove the top and the sides. All right, I think I've already addressed this. It does not need to be removed from the bottom. You need the wire basket on the bottom a lot of times just to hold the root ball together. So you don't want the root ball to fall apart and all your roots that are inside that root ball to be gone. So yeah, if you need to hold, if the basket needs to stay on the bottom, that is perfectly fine. And yes, if the ball holds together, you can remove it. All right, as you're backfilling the tree, when you got it at the right height, you got the hole the right depth. As you're backfilling, you need to make sure that you're getting water in there and everything's settling in good. So yeah, backfill and repeat, backfill, water and repeat. Just keep doing that until it's all, you've got all your backfill soil up and it's at the right height. Or excuse me, the right depth. All right. Many people think you're just supposed to stake a tree. If you don't stake, you're better off. When a tree is staked really tightly, it can no longer move in the wind. And that movement with the wind can actually increase the diameter of the trunk. That's just a little bit of stress that actually is a response, I think, probably to ethylene, where you're getting this movement and the trunk will get wider in response to that. If the tree is staked tightly and not allowed to bend with the wind, yes, it's going to get taller faster, but the caliper of the tree is not going to increase very much at all. And it's going to form roots more slowly. Okay. And a lot of times, stakes and the stakes used and the ties used to tie the trunk down are not removed and can cause damage to the tree itself. So again, if you don't have to stake, don't. But if you do, that's fine. Just do it properly. So how do you stake them? A bare root tree, you want to be sure that the stakes, 2 or 3 stakes, and you want them going into solid ground. Okay. Those that you see in that picture are going plumb through the bottom of the hole and into solid ground. Okay. So they're not going to move. They're not going to wiggle around. But we only stake for 1 growing season. That's it. By that point, the roots should be more established out into the surrounding soil, and you shouldn't have any issues with it just going back and forth, wallowing out. All right, mulch. You can go out as far away as you want with mulch from the trunk. For young trees, we generally just don't, because they're not going to be good. But for this mature tree, you could certainly go out a lot further than this. Only 2 or 3 inches deep. That's it. No volcano mulching, please. That is one of the worst things you can do, especially for a young tree that's newly planted. We prefer coarse organic mulch. Organic mulches are going to rot and improve the surrounding soil, the soil below. So it's always good to use organic mulches, really just about any time. I know for aesthetic reasons, sometimes people like to use other materials, but I would certainly choose organic over anything else. Again, should not be touching the trunk. And as a minimum, we say to the drip line. I know it doesn't happen, but again, the tree is the roots are going to grow much better under mulch than they are under turf. Here's volcano mulching. Do not do it. Please do not do it. This is what happens when you mulch too deep as well. If you put like 6 or 8 inches, the roots want to grow where it's easiest to grow, and they're going to grow up into that mulch. There's no doubt about it. Yes, at times mulch can harbor some fungi and other things. This is actually called dog vomit. You can call it cat vomit if you like cats. It's a fungus that grows in mulch. It does not do anything to hurt the tree or even the roots. Just make sure that if it's in a place where you need it to be aesthetically pleasing, just take a hose and wash that off. Organic mulches, some of them more than others can become hydrophobic, and y'all probably seen this if you've used mulch before, but it gets crusty on top, and as you can see with this picture, sometimes you can pick it up and it all kind of clings together, and when you put water on it, it runs off the mulch down the sides. If that ever happens, no worries, just take you a rake or some sort of or a shovel and just break up that mulch and make sure that it's broken apart, so the water will go down and not out and over. All right, I'm a big one for this too. This is not just Bill, but if you go walking in the woods, you're going to learn a lot about how to grow a tree. There's no grass competition. It's well mulched usually. Nobody's weed whacking around it and girdling the tree. They're not watering out there either. And I will admit, when we bring a tree, when we're planting a young tree into a non-natural environment like around our homes, they really do need water, and that's the one thing that you can do proactively to ensure that your tree's going to have the best success, is to water for probably the first anywhere from 3 to 5 years. You may have to do some watering to ensure that tree gets off and to a good start. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope you've learned something about planting trees. October, during Tree Week especially, we really are encouraging people to plant trees. It's a great time to plant trees, mainly because you think about it, deciduous trees in particular, they are going to be losing their leaves or have already lost their leaves. So there's no need for water immediately except for the root zone. The leaves won't be demanding water. So it's a really good time. The roots will grow fast in this warm soil coming out of summer. Mulching is very important to keep that soil warm and to keep what moisture you put in there. So yeah, October is a great time to plant trees. Go out there and plant trees and plant them the right way. At least we hope you do. So thank you very much for listening.